What is up, everybody? It's William with NGEN-PCs, and let's begin this video by going back in time to CES 2017. It is here that InWin first unveiled their prototype 806 case, which featured a wooden outer shell. So what really excited us about the wood mod was the idea of integrating epoxy resin into that case. Now, of course, epoxy resin is the new fad going around where people are integrating, live edges that would otherwise be scrap metal and turning them into these beautiful tables that have these, rivers of color in between. So we wanted to make sure that when this first came out, we were going to be the very first ones to integrate that into this case. Now, fast forward to 2019, and InWin is not going to be producing that case. So if we want to be the very first ones to do this, we're going to have to do it ourselves. Now, since we're wanting to be the very first people to bring this into the PC modding scene, it feels appropriate to us to do this with the very first case that InWin ever sponsored us with. Plus, again, we're taking inspiration from InWin's 806 design. So to begin, our design is very simple. We want to give a front wooden piece here, have a 45-degree angle, and have a top piece that's also going to be wood. We're just going to straight up cover the I/O and give this a solid front, and I want to put a power switch on the back over here. Now in this piece, the idea is to have a wooden resin all the way up the front that extends all the way to the back. And this river is going to be done in a UV reactive blue. And within this river, we're going to have our engine logo here, InWin down here at the bottom, and our sponsors up top being EK, Team Group, and we're going to have ASUS as well. So I don't have as much woodworking experience as most of those who are doing these epoxy resin tables have, but after doing some research, I feel like I can fit it within my realm of tools and my expertise. So to make this easier on us, I'm going to get a long piece of wood, and instead of building a frame to pour the epoxy in, I'm actually going to route out the river myself and then be able to use that as a pool to basically pour this resin in. We're going for a light color because we want it to match this case, and we feel like the white would match better with a lighter color wood, and I want to make sure the wood is thin. I want it to look like it's an integrated part of this case and not just two big blocks that we just set on the top and the front. So I'm looking for something about ½ an inch thick. From there, we need epoxy resin, which I've ordered from Amazon because we don't have any in our local supplier, and we've chosen the color that we want for the river. We really like this light blue that InWin has chosen, so we've gone with the light metallic blue that's going to be UV reactive, and the idea is that the final build will also have UV reactive fluid in the same color. So when we go to do the river, I've had the idea that I want the logos to be a part of the epoxy resin. And so when we go to cast the blue, we're going to fill it up about halfway, let that dry and cure, then apply our logos to it. Then go back and then fill it with the rest of the clear epoxy resin. That way when we polish this up and you look at this from a side angle, you're going to see your logos inside the river itself, and we think it's going to be a great effect. And with that, it's going to be a learning experience for me. I've got an end goal. I know what we want. I know I want to be the first to do it. So all that's left is to get out there and do it. So let's go outside and let's go ahead and start cutting this piece of wood. All right, so first things first, I need to make this piece of wood more manageable. I obviously don't need a full 8-foot piece of wood. If the area I'm covering on this case is only 19 inches by 19 inches. So the plan is to rip this in half at 48 inches. That way it gives me 10 inches of wiggle room to make additional cuts if I need to. So first things first, let's cut this in half. So now that I've got it cut in half, the next thing I have to do is make sure the width is correct. Now this case is 8.5 inches wide, so I do need to trim some of this board. I do have 2 shots of this since I've cut that board in half, but I prefer this piece here, so I'm hoping that I can get this on my first try. Alright, so that worked well. I do have it at 8.5 inches wide. The next step is to simply design the river layout that I want. So I'm just going to grab a pencil, go ahead and sketch it out. Again, we're going to make sure that this is more like a pool that we can pour the resin into. So I'm basically going to go ahead and not go off any edge and carve out what I like. So that was a really rough sketch, but it doesn't really matter because once I have the router, I'll be able to kind of more freeform the design that I like. It's mainly just to keep me within certain boundaries. Now I can't just turn the router on and kind of set it in place and carve out the pool. I'm gonna need to give it a notch to drop into, so I'm gonna grab a portioner bit that's a little bigger than the router bit itself, drill out a hole, then take the router, come through and carve this out. Alright, so I've got the router out now, so now I need to cut out the area that the pool is gonna be so I can pour the resin into it. Alright, so we now have the very first peak at the river that's going to be running through this piece of wood. I love how it turns out. I think this is going to be excellent. So now that I have this carved out, I need to go back with a sander, clean up my edges, smooth it out, then we'll be able to coat this whole thing in its first coat of epoxy resin, which will harden and allow us to then pour resin into it like a river. Alright, so I have in front of me our piece of wood, and I brought it indoors because I need a climate controlled place for this to dry. Now, the ratio is really simple with this kit. It's simply 50-50. Mix it for 3 minutes, pour it into another container, mix thoroughly again for 2 minutes, that way I can ensure that it's fully mixed, and then I apply it to my surface. In this case, the wood is really dry, and it's ready for this to be applied, and I expect it to absorb quite a bit. Now this isn't going to be a final coat by any means, but it's going to be the base coat for this to go ahead and harden. Once it's dried and solidified, it'll be the finish that we can pour in the actual blue coat that we want on the other side. So I'm going to start with the back, go ahead and get this sealed, flip it over, and then do the coat on the other side. Along the way, I'll be using this heat gun. That way, whenever I go over it, I can kind of get some air bubbles released if there are any. Again, not going to be the final coat, but I don't want to start our first coat with air bubbles. Alright, so now that I've got it mixed, there are quite a bit of air bubbles, so the next step is to let it sit for about another 2 minutes, so some of these are relieved. Alright, so 2 minutes have passed. There are still quite a bit of bubbles, but a lot of it has gone to the top. I'm going to go ahead and apply this to the back, and if I notice that there is going to be a problem with air bubbles, I'll just go ahead and stop and mix up a new batch again before I get to the front side. So let's begin. Alright, so I'm already noticing the air bubbles are already going away, and of course I'll use a heat gun to go ahead and remove more of them as the curing process begins. And it definitely has like self-leveling properties to it. Alright, so it looks like it definitely took 6 ounces of mixture just to coat the back side. Alright, so the board already has a really good sheen to it, and like I said, you can tell that it has self-leveling kind of properties to it. So I'm going to go ahead and use the heat gun, get rid of some other excess air bubbles that are in it. Then once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and mix up another batch, probably trying with maybe 8 ounces this time, then do the remainder of it. So I'm definitely glad I started with the back side first, which I needed to do anyways. But I've already learned a lot of how this lays out. You can tell what kind of areas have little particles in them, that are little trouble spots. So I want to make sure that when I do the other side that I go back and make sure that it's really clean before I apply anything. Right now it already has a beautiful sheen across the back, so I think this is definitely going in the direction that we want. And then if I do everything as epoxy, I'm not going to have to stain this, and this is going to be a really hard, great material to have on the outside of the case. Alright, so this looks great. This was everything that I needed this coat to be. I'm going to go ahead and take a heat gun, release some of the air bubbles it had, but this is exactly where I needed today to end. So this is going to give us the perfect base coat that we can then pour our actual river into. That way it doesn't absorb into the wood, it doesn't leak out, anything like that. So that wraps it up for today. We're going to come back tomorrow, examine how this turned out. This will probably cure within 8 hours or so. It's not a very thick coat of resin by any means. And then we'll go ahead, if everything's okay, we will go ahead and mix up the Blue River, pour it in, and begin to see for the first time what this is going to look like. Now day 2, and I've seen this for the first time. It looks excellent. And I can really see where the epoxy has been laid, where it's really smooth, kind of some of my troubled areas, but I can get back to those later. All in all, this is a great first start. So the only issue I've encountered so far that I didn't expect was that the backside actually has kind of drip bubbles. So it'll definitely require a lot of sanding to get that smooth again, but it's a side ultimately that you're not going to see anyways because this will be attached to the case, so I'm not too worried. Either way, I've calculated the volume I'm going to need to lay out the blue. I need 19.2 fluid ounces, so I'm probably going to mix up 24, and then I'll be able to kind of pour it in here, and I'll just kind of throw away the rest if I have leftovers. I've got a UV reactive mica powder that I'm going to mix in to get the color that I want, and once I have that, I'm going to pour it in here, try and fill it up at least halfway, if not a little bit more, and then I'm going to walk away, come back tomorrow, and once that's set, I can apply the vinyl. So I've now followed the exact same procedures I followed yesterday, except this time I've mixed 24 ounces of the liquid. I'm now going to add this mica powder in, stir it until I get the desired color. Alright, so I think I've gotten a blue that I like. It's a little more transparent than I was expecting, but at the same time, it might give us some dimension if we see a little bit of the wood grain below it. I do have a little bit of the powder left, so what I can do is I can always kind of pour and dab some in afterwards and kind of swirl it around to give it a little more depth if I need to. So now, I'm going to begin pouring this in. Alright, so before I pour all of it, I'm going to let it self-level and see how high this gets me. If I calculated correctly, it should give me about 1/8 of an inch the way up, which is what I like. I'm roughly 1/4 of an inch into the wood, so an 1/8 inch would be halfway up. It is definitely opaque, or rather, it's definitely transparent, so I can see all the wood grain below. But I think I like that. I think that looks really cool. Alright, well that's it for now. I do like how this is turning out. It's a very subtle effect that it has, but it definitely looks like a river. I like that it is slightly transparent because we get the texture of the wood behind it, which gives it a lot more depth and dimension than a solid color. It is perfectly, halfway up, almost all across the board, because this is about as level as I can get. Once this dries, I'm then going to go through, add the vinyl in the locations that I want, and then I'm going to pour a regular epoxy over it. Now, because I'm letting this dry fully, I am going to have to come back and sand lightly with a 180 grit or 220 grit sandpaper to rough up the epoxy. That way the new epoxy will have something to adhere to. Normally, I could just proceed with a clear coat in maybe 4 hours or so when this reaches what they normally refer to as a stage B setting, where it's still a little tacky, but it's firm. I'm afraid that if I'm trying to get a sticker basically placed on this, that I could ruin it unless I let this dry fully. So we're going to come back tomorrow, have the vinyl, and we're going to apply it, and then hopefully pour in the clear resin.